Thank you. Thank you all for sticking around on a long day. So this is joint work with Maxim Bichuch at the University at Buffalo. And since it's short time, getting right into it, why do we want to design on-chain options? And kind of that top line is the reason convexity matters for risk. It gives you leveraged upside exposure while capping your downside losses. So if you think about perps, which a lot of people in this room are familiar with, you get that leveraged upside, but you also get the leveraged downside. So the whole idea of convexity is we're capping our downside. This allows us to redistribute the tail risk, and it's something we can't just replicate with static linear instruments. We would need to do dynamic hedging, and this starts to get really expensive on-chain. So we want this because it allows us to redistribute the tail risk. We're able to create resilience. This helps prevent cascading failures. It stabilizes portfolios. It's something that in traditional finance we've had for decades now, and when they work well, they work really well. So the goal of this talk is, can we design options to serve this same purpose but within DeFi? So because a lot of people here are computer scientists, what is an option? Effectively, it is the right but not the obligation to perform some financial transaction. So when someone talks about a call option, they're saying you're buying the right to buy some underlying at some fixed price, some fixed strike price K, which means that the payoff is the underlying price minus the strike price, if that is greater than 0, or 0 if it's not. Because if it's less than 0, you wouldn't exercise. You wouldn't actually use the optionality. And a put option is just the right to sell the asset at some fixed predetermined price, strike price K, maximum of K minus S and 0. So these are the right to buy and the right to sell. And if you're buying an option, you're paying some upfront premium. If you're selling this option, you are underwriting the tail risk. So the whole idea is you have a buyer paying a premium, getting this optionality that they can have the right but not the obligation to perform some financial transaction in the future. And there are really 3 classical option types. There are more than these 3. But for the purposes of this talk, there's European options where you exercise at maturity. So there's some expiration date, and you either choose to exercise at that time or you don't at all. There's American options where you can exercise any time during the life of that option. And then there's Bermudan where there's discrete time points that you can exercise. And if we look at DeFi, options have failed. Effectively, you don't have decentralized options. If we look at spot markets, so DEX to SEX spot trade volume, for the last year, 2 years, we've kind of had 10 to 20% of all spot volume in a decentralized exchange. If we look at options, it's 1% of all option volume on cryptos are in decentralized protocols. So we have this distinction of 10 to 20% of the spot, 1% or less than 1% of options. And if we dig into what these option protocols are doing, there's kind of 2 main paradigms that exist. There's Oracle-driven paradigms like Lira, Derive, or Hedgic, where these are cash settled, and they use an Oracle to determine what the payoff should be. So if someone exercises, they look at an Oracle and say, well, there's the price, and we just plug it into the maximum of, for a call option, maximum of S minus K and 0, and give you that value. This gives you the natural leverage of an option. The problem is, in DeFi, that increases the natural leverage of an Oracle manipulation. So these are very unstable for anything other than the most liquid assets. So now we have things where there's a lot of Oracle manipulations that can happen. Option underwriters are facing unbounded losses. Basically, you need a really robust margining and liquidation system. And once you add all of that in, effectively, you've gotten centralization again. The other paradigm is kind of options that are derived from AMMs. So you have kind of the replicating market maker design, and you have panoptic. The whole idea is if you are an LP in an AMM, you have a concave payoff. So if we can short that, you get a convex payoff. The problem is once you say you're shorting this LP position, now you need something like a streaming premium, which ultimately leads to non-fungibility, non-composability. It kind of loses the entire reason you wanted DeFi, why DeFi is nice in the first place. So these are ultimately failures with permissionless execution. So our goal is to design the semantics of an option paradigm for on-chain constraints. And in particular, we're going to have 5 on-chain constraints that we want to satisfy. The first is autarkic settlement. We said if we have oracles, if we're depending on someone else, then the manipulation from this this manipulation that can occur becomes really leveraged. So if we don't depend on anyone else, if we're autarkic, there's no manipulation. So that leads us to say we want physical settlement. So instead of cash settlement, where we look at the difference in price and strike, we're going to say if you are executing the call option, you're actually buying at the strike. You're providing that strike in USDC, and you're getting ETH from exercising. We want asynchronous execution. We don't want to worry about liveness failures, failed settlement during execution windows, which ultimately, to get around, we want things like American options. We don't want to say we care about a specific block, but just whenever you exercise this option, you're exercising this option. We want fungibility. Ultimately, we want to be able to pool these. We want to be able to have these as protocols. We want an option to be the same as anyone else's option, which means we want something that is exchange tradable. We want something that is composable so that we can actually use it outside of our own system, which means it needs to be self-custodied. And very importantly, we need a positive cost of carry. Effectively, if we remove that positive cost of carry, now I bought this tail risk protection and I don't have to pay anything else. That's great for me. It's terrible for an underwriter, which means that no one's going to actually sell me this option and the product's going to fail. There's one other constraint that I add in here. It's not technically required, but a perpetual lifespan of this option is kind of important for composability. Effectively, if we have a maturity date, then any downstream protocol needs to understand what to do at the maturity time. It needs to understand how to roll the option. It needs to understand how to exercise the option at maturity. It needs to know what to do. If we have something perpetual, anyone downstream doesn't need to understand maturity dates because there is no maturity date. So kind of have the star there. It's not strictly necessary, but I do think it's really important. So once I say I wanted perpetual option, the first thing in a lot of textbooks you have is perpetual American options. They're no expiry, they're American, we can make them, we can make it so that they have physical settlement. Seems like it works. The problem is they have zero cost of carry. I buy this option, I'm not paying anything over time in order to maintain this optionality. So there's no meaningful leverage long term because the premium is going to be maximum price that it really could be. So in practice, these are not actually utilized anywhere. They're a really nice textbook exercise because we can do pricing on them really nicely. But what does exist? There are what are called continuous installment options. So now to actually impose a cost of carry, the holder of these options needs to pay continuously over time to keep the option alive. But now the option holder can lapse. They can stop that payment. It ends the optionality. It kills the option without exercising. And it achieves this positive cost of carry with the perpetual convexity. The problem is, once we have this streaming payments that need to be made, we lose either fungibility or composability. We ultimately need margin accounts in order to make this work. So they solve the valuation problem, but they fail operationally in DeFi. We had the idea of, can we convert that payment stream from a CI option into state evolution? So what we do is we sell a fraction of the option holdings back to the market and use the proceeds to pay off the underwriter. So we're selling small amounts of our option every block, and this is now equivalent to a decaying notional of the option. So we've now gotten the cost of carry from the continuous installment options, but we've done it by recovering fungibility and composability. Everyone is decaying at the same rate. So we now have an option type that satisfies all of our constraints, which then brings to the question of, can we design a market for this? And the answer is yes. And we take ideas from lending protocols and we say, let's look at the utilization rate. So we have some open interest X of options that have been underwritten. We have collateral sitting in this pool. So if it's a call option, that collateral would be in the underlying asset. If it's a put option, it's in stable coins. And we look at the utilization rate. How much of the collateral is actually being used to underwrite options at that moment? And then we can quote a premium, function P, that maps from utilization into the actual cost of these options. Should be non-decreasing, positive premium for positive utilization, and limits that actually give you the limit of what the option could be worth. So for a call option, we can take this ratio 2 times utilization divided by 1 minus utilization cubed. It does get nicer as we move through, but that one kind of starts off nicely. Put option, we can just use a linear function. But that gives us the instantaneous marginal premium. So we can then look at the running integral, the net premium function. When we do that, our call option becomes the odds ratio squared. Put option becomes a quadratic. But more importantly, we want to actually look at what happens with our collateral. So we want to scale things, this net premium, by the collateral. So we get the total premium function, C times the net premium of our utilization. If we have utilization less than or equal to 1, infinite otherwise. And this is going to be strictly increasing in open interest, non-increasing in collateral, convex, positive homogeneous, and almost everywhere differentiable. And again, we can write down kind of what these functions can look like. But the key thing is, with this total premium function, we can say, what's the cost of any operation? So let's say I want to buy an option. I'm an option holder. I'm doing a buy to open operation. I'm paying delta phi for however many options I'm buying. If I then want to exercise, I supply the strike, I exercise the option, and because that will affect the actual utilization rate, there's a rebate that goes to the underwriters, to the LPs. If I don't want to exercise, I just want to sell to close. I can do that, and I get paid back based on the current utilization rate. If I'm an LP, if I want to add collateral to this system, I'm going to sell to open. So I'm going to get a rebate by providing collateral. And now if I want to exit, I need to buy to close. So I'm going to pay in order to exit my position. And over time as an LP, I'm collecting from the amortization rate because the open interest is decaying over time. That's decreasing utilization, which provides yield to the LPs continuously in time. So this gives us really nice market properties. We have path independence, which means there's no round-trip arbitrage. It can't default. All the nice properties we see with AMMs, we're able to get with this system. But with the time remaining, I want to talk about, why is this actually useful? Where can this be used in kind of composability? So once we have this kind of resilient primitive, we can look at things like lending markets. So we lend out currency for over-collateralized positions. The liquidators come and claim this collateral to close the position if the loan-to-value ratio exceeds some threshold. And liquidators make a profit if they're fast enough and if the markets are sufficiently liquid. Both of those are necessary for the liquidators to actually act, which introduces kind of two problems. The first, these haircuts are governance set. If it's too large, this is a very capital inefficient system. It means that I need to over-collateralize too much, which is problematic for the end user, for the borrower. If the haircut is too small, now there's a risk that there's going to be bad debt because effectively this isn't being priced into the system. Alternatively, problem two, the loan to value can also just be manipulated. So I can try to manipulate these oracles. There's ways that they robustify them, but generally those robustifications slow down the information from the oracle. So the idea here is, what if we effectively pre-fund this liquidation with an option? So what we do a protective put. We take our underlying and we take a put option on that underlying, and we make this endogenous collateral. Now the put option's premium is serving as the haircut. So we can, for instance, borrow USDC with ETH collateral. We provide ETH, AMPO put options, and they will settle at E times K USDC. So we know we can always recover that E times K USDC from this collateral. It amortizes, so it is decaying over time, so you need to provide a little bit extra of these options at the beginning. And if the amount of protection decays too much, anyone can come in and liquidate. The key idea is liquidation is just exercising the option. You don't need to worry about what the underlying market looks like. You can guarantee the payoff of this collateral. So what this kind of can look like, let's just say our debt is growing from $1. We have this 1.01 loan-to-value ratio, and our collateral is decaying based on this predetermined rate. So once we cross that threshold, we have a clear amount of time that we can set before we get into a bad debt situation. So we don't need to worry about liveness. We can just get this to work. But beyond lending protocols, we also have things like depeg insurance that we can set up, because effectively, if I'm a stablecoin issuer and people are worried about my stablecoin, so something like the peg stability mechanism, then I can basically put treasury of USDC to underwrite put options on my stablecoin. And if people are worried, they buy the protection, and that gives them the ability to convert at par. So this is now priced insurance to protect the peg, as opposed to just offering something from the protocol. So the DAO can underwrite put options as yield-bearing protection, and in doing so, that DAO is now being compensated with yield for anyone who is buying the protection. And this also would allow us to have forward information on depegging risk. So we get something like a fear index on any of these stable coins. And then once we start saying we have this in lending protocols, on depeg insurance, we start getting something that's approximating loss mutualization. Now we have multiple protocols that are all using the same collateral to protect themselves from downside events. So traditional finance has solved this with the central counterparty, which centralizes default management. Effectively, we can use something like an option to be a single liquidation engine across DeFi. So we can have external enforcement that can be replaced by shared state evolution. So with that, thank you very much. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you for the nice presentations. Those with questions, please come up to the mics. Maybe I start with a question then. You have this amortization rate in your model. How is that set, and like, can you get it wrong?
So there's no wrong answer. It would be set, like, my thought is it would be set permissionlessly. So whoever is creating the pool gets to choose the amortization rate that they want. If you choose it too small, if we're saying we're amortizing 1 basis point a day, maybe that's too low, and the premiums that would be charged are going to be very high. If you set it as too high an amortization rate, it stops being so effective as kind of the collateral, because you're just going to be crossing this threshold very quickly. So there's somewhere in between. I've generally just on my own kind of think 50 basis points a day seems to work pretty well, but there's no rhyme or reason for that.
Okay.
Yeah, really cool getting rid of the oracle risk. Do you see this as kind of like dominoes start to fall to replace more things that we think of as DeFi with these kind of mechanisms?
Yeah, so I effectively view this as kind of a starting point for risk transfer in DeFi. You see a little bit of it with like Pendle with risk transfer. There it's more like a maturity transformation. But the idea is if we really want DeFi to grow, then we need things like risk transformation, maturity transformation, which if we're relying on oracles, which for the most part are looking at centralized institutions, it ultimately means that we're not a truly decentralized system.
Okay. If there are no more speakers, let's thank the speaker again, and next one go up.